Family. So we've been talking a lot on this show about the new world order taking shape and how Russia's influence in Africa is growing fast. And if you've been in the land,
In Samuel, and he's saying the real reason why Russia have not colonized any African country, has been discussed, details on the breakdown show on Pan Genius TV. Nti busuya, yansanka video no. Nti video ni nyina abram nti bestrom sombe time kuchu. No ma hwe video ni nyina kosi wi. Na se hwe video ni wi a, ne wo bia no. Ye dia so amamo. Nti busuya, so social YouTube abe subscribe page. Se hwe social Facebook so abe follow page and social TikTok so abe follow page. Na like video yi. No man remfi say you share for 5. Ebusuya, yen kono ko hwe video na aka na wi. Na wi a ye din komo na aka no. Atuaso. In Samuel we are say.
but others have raised a really important question too. If Russia was at the Berlin Conference, remember we talked about that here on the show, the same table where Europe divided up Africa, why didn't they walk away with any colonies? And I'll be honest, that question had me curious too. So I started digging, and what I found was fascinating. Well, turns out there are two main schools of thoughts on why Russia never colonized Africa. One side says Russia just didn't believe in colonization. Okay, fair. But if that's true, why were they in the room? Why show up to a land grabbing conference if you're not trying to grab land? The other side says Russia absolutely wanted colonies. They just failed. They showed up late, had no leverage, and got outplayed by the British, the French, and the rest of the gang. Very interesting. Well, today on The Breakdown, we're going to set the record straight. We are going to unpack this mystery. What really happened at the Berlin Conference? Whether Russia tried and failed to colonize Africa, and what this forgotten chapter reveals about how power works then, and yes, especially now. Because sometimes the empires that look clean in history just didn't have the chance to get their hands dirty. It's going to be a good one. But before we dive in, I want to say a big welcome to all of our new subscribers and members. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for going on this journey with us and for being a part of our community. Because here at Pan Genius, we're not just building a channel. We're building a home for Black stories that are told with truth, with care, and with intention. And if that matters to you, and I hope it does, click subscribe, tap the bell, join our growing membership community, where we go deeper beyond the headlines, and drop a super thanks to support our work here. All right, now let's break it all down. So to understand why Russia didn't colonize Africa, we've got to start by understanding what kind of empire Russia actually was. Unlike Britain, France, or Belgium, whose empire stretched across oceans, Russia built a land empire. It expanded by foot, by horse, and later by rail, not by sea. And that's critical. From the 1700s into the late 19th century, Russia was focused on dominating Eurasia, not Africa. They were busy expanding east into Siberia, south into the Caucasus, and deep into Central Asia, swallowing up what is now Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Georgia, and Chechnya. That expansion wasn't accidental. It was strategic. They were obsessed with securing their borders against rivals like the Ottoman Empire in the south, Persia in the east, and later Britain in India. In fact, some historians call the 19th century the era of the Great Game, a shadow war between Britain and Russia over influence in Central Asia. So while Britain was out building a navy to reach Africa and the Caribbean, Russia was bogged down fighting mountain tribes in Dagestan. Their eyes were locked on what they called their near abroad. And that's key, because empires don't expand everywhere at once. They expand where it's easiest, where it's profitable, or where it's necessary for survival. And for Russia, Africa simply didn't check any of those boxes, at least not at that time. They didn't have a major Atlantic port. They didn't have the naval power to compete. And they didn't have a strong commercial class pushing for overseas trade, the way Britain or France did. So by the time the Berlin Conference rolled around in 1884, Russia just wasn't a serious contender. They showed up, yes, but more so to observe, to maintain diplomatic ties and avoid being isolated than to carve up territory for themselves. It wasn't that they were morally superior. It was that their empire was looking in a different direction, eastward, not south. But, and this is where it gets interesting, that doesn't mean Russia never looked at Africa or that it was never interested. In fact, there were moments, quiet, often forgotten moments, when Russia did try to plant a flag on the continent. One of those moments, Ethiopia. Let's break it down. In the late 19th century, Russia saw Ethiopia not just as a fellow Orthodox Christian nation, but as a potential ally, a foot in the door to Africa. There were diplomatic visits, secret offers of military cooperation, even dreams of building a Russian Orthodox presence there. But none of it stuck. So why did those early efforts fail? And what do they reveal about Russia's real intentions toward Africa? In the late 19th century, while the scramble for Africa was in full swing, Russia started looking at Ethiopia through a very different lens. Here was a nation, fiercely independent, never colonized, and perhaps most importantly to the Russians, deeply Orthodox Christian. To Russia, Ethiopia wasn't just geopolitically strategic. It was spiritually aligned. It felt familiar. It felt righteous. Russian envoys made diplomatic visits. Ethiopian emperors were sent gifts. There were discussions of joint religious missions, even vague ideas of military cooperation. And some in Moscow believed that Ethiopia could become a kind of gateway to influence in East Africa, a partner, maybe even a protectorate down the line. But here's the thing. Ethiopia didn't need a protector. Under Emperor Menelik II, Ethiopia was already holding its own, negotiating with Italy, France, and Britain, and later defeating the Italians at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, one of the most iconic anti-colonial victories in African history. Menelik welcomed diplomacy, but he wasn't looking to be anyone's pawn. So while Russia dreamed of religious brotherhood and soft influence, Ethiopia remained firmly independent. Without a strong naval presence or colonial infrastructure, Russia had no way to deepen its role. It couldn't defend Ethiopia, couldn't build supply routes, and couldn't project military power in the region. So, just like that, the relationship fizzled. And then Russia's quiet attempt to stake a claim in Africa slipped away. And this wasn't an isolated incident. According to Vladimir Shubin, in his article, How Russia Tried to Colonize Africa and Failed, Russia also tried to build relationships in places like Madagascar and Egypt. But again, no colonies, no protectorates, no permanent foothold. Why? Because Russia's ambitions didn't match its capabilities. It didn't have the money, it didn't have the ships, and it didn't have the leverage. The truth is, Russia's failure to colonize Africa wasn't because it was morally opposed to empire. It's because it wasn't strong enough to compete with the colonial titans of the day. That's his argument. And that's a nuance many people miss. Now that we've laid out the history, the land-based empire, the failed attempt in Ethiopia, the quiet diplomacy with no follow-through, it's time to ask the bigger question. What does Russia's absence from Africa's colonial map actually mean? Because here's where the debate gets tricky. On one side, there's the popular claim, especially in online Pan-Africanist and pro-Russian circles, that Russia never colonized Africa because it didn't believe in colonization, that it stood apart from Western empires, that it was always different, more respectful, more anti-imperialist. And listen, on the surface, that sounds good. You can understand why people think like that, especially today when Russia is presenting itself as a friend to Africa, no strings attached, no colonial baggage, no lectures. But the deeper you dig, the more that narrative starts to unravel. Because as we've seen, Russia did believe in empire.
Russia. We don't often think of it as a colonial power. We associate colonies primarily with the overseas conquests of Spain, France, and Britain. But Russia has been colonizing its neighboring territories for centuries, primarily in Asia. Its actions follow the same mechanisms as the colonization process of Western countries: the exploitation of natural resources, forced modernization, the creation of local elites to strengthen the position of the colonizer, and the imposition of its own language and culture. Kazakhstan is a prime example of Russian colonization. But after more than 3 decades of independence, it is still struggling with decolonization.
Just ask the Chechens. Ask the Kazakhs. Ask the people of Central Asia. They were colonized brutally for generations. So no, it's not that Russia rejected colonization. It's that Africa was too far, too expensive, and too competitive at the time. And when they tried, they failed. Which brings us to today, my people, because now, over a century later, Russia is back in Africa. But this time, it's not coming with ships and flags. It's coming with weapons, mining contracts, private military firms, grain diplomacy, and anti-Western messaging. And some African leaders and citizens are welcoming that. Not because they love Russia, because they're fed up with the West, fed up with broken aid promises, with IMF debt traps, with hypocrisy. So Russia steps in and says, we never colonized you. We're different. Let's work together. This is what true partnership should look like. But the question we have to ask is this: is the absence of colonial history the same as a guarantee of good intentions? Does a lack of past domination automatically make someone trustworthy today? Because yes, Russia never built colonies in Africa, but empire isn't just about territory, is it? It's about control, influence, and access. And in that sense, the game might look different today, but the stakes are still the same. Let's not get it twisted. Now, to understand why Russia is so active in Africa now, you have to look at what's happening in the world today. We're living in the middle of a global realignment. The old Western order, led by the US and Europe, is being challenged by new powers: China, India, Brazil, and yes, Russia. But here's the thing. Russia is more isolated than ever. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, it's faced sweeping Western sanctions. It's been cut out from global financial systems, diplomatically sidelined. Its image in the West, it's tarnished. So where does Russia turn? Where does it run to? Africa. And not just for friends, but for something deeper: survival, legitimacy, resources, and relevance. Let's break that down. First, there is economic necessity. With trade routes to the West frozen, Africa's markets matter. Russia needs places to sell its grain, its energy, its weapons. And Africa, well, it provides demand and diplomatic cover. Then there's geopolitical influence. Every time an African nation abstains from a UN vote condemning Russia, every time a president shakes Putin's hand at a summit, it chips away at Western narratives of isolation. It tells the world, Russia still has allies. Russia still has reach. And of course, there's the resource game. Russia is investing in mining rights in countries like Sudan, Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, military partnerships through mercenary groups like Wagner, food diplomacy, offering grain shipments and fertilizer when others won't. This isn't charity. This is strategy. Russia is positioning itself as the anti-colonial partner, the anti-Western option, the friend who understands Africa. But as we've seen, Russia's relationship with empire is complicated. It may not have colonized Africa in the 19th century, but in the 21st century, it's working hard to shape the continent's future. The question is this true partnership or a new kind of dependency dressed in different colors? So, my people, let's bring it all home. Russia was at the Berlin Conference. They showed up to the table where Africa was being carved up, but they left with nothing. Some say it's because they didn't want a piece of the pie. Others say they just couldn't get it. But now we know the fuller story. Russia didn't colonize Africa not because it was morally above empire, but because it was already building one somewhere else. And when they did try to step into Africa quietly through Ethiopia, through diplomacy, through soft power, they failed. But they never stopped watching. And now, over a century later, they're back. This time, not with flags and forts, but with contracts, soldiers, narratives, and deals. So here's the real question. Can you be anti-colonial if you still want control? And does the absence of colonial past automatically make someone a trustworthy partner today? Because if history teaches us anything, my people, is this: empires don't disappear. They just evolve. And influence doesn't always need a flag.
Yo, ebusians also look very younger. They have a better lifestyle. They look very smart. And I recommend the apple cider vinegar from Goli, and the super fruits, and the super green, and the ashwagandha gummies, and the sleepy gummies. Then you know free Goli nutrition. What US. Now so I say utubia. Miss recommend say ube use promo code. Promo code in the description of this video. And as I say, you also want to be part of. I'm better to my DBs. Now check the description part of this video. Now I join free. Now I end some cool cash. Let us show how far. Enjoy. And say so open to Chirmubia. Obet me inbox me. Now my boy now I join. So I also register as your content creator. And I say wow, she has open media to description part of your video. And I saw the battle video I see both YouTube, Facebook, and Mr. Also bet me contact me. Now I should be no registration here free. You can join in the description part of this video. Details in the description part of this video. Now with the budget piece I joining. Yes, Goli gummies. So me see Goli and work gummies. Goli gummies. Apple cider vinegar. Super fruit, super green, any ashwagandha, any nyaki can home. Yes, Goli, a good product. Open me I'll join your moon. Now I need some cool cards that show offer. Yes, Goli gummies.